Hello friends, welcome back to my YouTube channel Journey with Vijay Kumar Srivastav. Today we are going to study the topic herbicide resistance. Here to understand what is herbicide resistance. Herbicide resistance is a phenomenon by which a plant or biotype is capable to survive and reproduce seeds even after exposure to a dose of herbicides normally lethal to the wild type. Herbicide resistance is measured by resistance factor GR50 values, which is based on the percentage inhibition of growth or dry weight of plant. Here to go through development of herbicide resistance. As per Osuna et al. 2011, herbicide resistance is the ability of a weed species to avoid the effect of the chemical weed control applied. As per Pauls and Yu 2010, there are two main mechanisms of resistance, which are non-target site resistance and target site resistance. Non-target site resistance is the alteration of the nucleotide sequences of the gene to which the herbicide binds and prevents or stops herbicide action, whereas target site resistance occurs as a result of mutation or gene duplication. Now we will differentiate herbicide resistance and herbicide tolerance. Both terms differ from each other. Herbicide resistance is the inherited ability of an individual plant to survive a herbicide application that would kill a normal population of the same species, whereas herbicide tolerance is the inherent ability of a species to survive and reproduce after herbicide treatment at a normal use rate. Herbicide resistance doesn't equate to poor performance of a herbicide. Resistant weeds can often survive application of herbicide at rates that are much greater than the recommended rate. Here to study herbicide resistance in detail. Herbicide resistance is normally present at very low frequencies in weed populations before the herbicide is first applied. Variation exists within every population, with some individuals having the ability to survive the herbicide application. A weed population is defined as resistant when a herbicide that once controlled the population is no longer effective, or sometimes an arbitrary figure of 20% survival is used. The proportion of herbicide resistance individuals will rise due to selection pressure in situations where one herbicide mode of action group is applied repeatedly. Herbicide resistance is permanent in weeds and their progeny with dominant target site resistance. With cessation of the use of that herbicide mode of action group, the ratio of dominant target site resistant to susceptible individuals will remain the same, and only the total number of weeds present can be reduced. Weeds with this type of resistance do not exhibit a fitness penalty. Here to study how does a weed becomes resistant to a herbicide. There are three major ways in which resistance may arise within a weed population. First one is pre-existing resistance. Within any weed population, there may be some plants that already contain a rare change in a gene or genes that enable them to survive the application of a particular herbicide that would normally kill this species. Genetic variation may alter physiological traits that enable herbicide uptake, translocation and activation at the site of action. Alternatively, changes may influence the plant's ability to detoxify herbicides or enable transport to a site within the plant where the herbicide is not lethal. Each time the herbicide is applied, susceptible plants die and those with resistance will survive. Second is importation of resistance. It is possible that resistance may not be present in the population initially, but is introduced as a weed contaminant in crop seed or fodder or machinery or in animals. This is particularly important for rarer forms of resistance such as glyphosate resistance. Third way is natural dispersal. Weed seeds can also be spread by wind and water. Pollen can also be dispersed great distances, although the percentage remaining viable at a distance greater than 10 meters is low. Floodwater also has the potential to move a wide range of weed seeds over large distances. There are different types of resistance about which we will study here. First one is single resistance, which represents the resistance to single herbicide. Second is cross resistance. Third one is multiple resistance, and fourth is partial resistance, about which we will discuss in next slide. Cross resistance is defined as the ability of a weed population to express resistance to more than one herbicide. It may arise without the weed population ever being exposed to one of the herbicide. Cross resistance is the resistance of a weed biotype to two or more herbicides of same on different chemical groups having the same mode of action by a single resistance mechanism. Cross resistance is of two types. First one is across herbicide subgroups, and second across herbicide mode of action groups. We will go through details about across herbicide subgroups first. This occurs when a weed population is resistant to more than one herbicide subgroup within a specific mode of action group. It is the resistance of a weed biotype to two or more herbicides of same or different chemical groups having the same mode of action by a single resistance mechanism. This is usually target site resistance. Phallus minor is the example of this category, where Phallus minor is resistant to isoproteron. Second is across herbicide mode of action groups. This resistance occurs when a weed population is resistant to herbicides from within more than one mode of action group. Cross resistance evolves when a weed biotype already resistant to a herbicide which shows resistance to other herbicides of same or different chemical groups to which it had never been exposed, and this is usually non-target site resistance. Multiple resistance refers to the herbicide resistance where a weed species show resistance to two or more herbicides of different chemical class having two distinctly different mode of action through two different resistance mechanisms. Example like one population of annual ryegrass present in Australia exhibits confirmed resistance to 5 different herbicide mode of action groups. Now partial resistance. Partial resistance and developing resistance are terms used to describe a situation where only a small proportion, often less than 20% of the population survives the standard application rate of the herbicide in question. Weed populations are normally classified by testing services as resistant when more than 20% of the population survive the standard application rate of herbicide. Here we will focus light on factors affecting herbicide resistance. These factors can be grouped in three categories. First one is weed factor, second is herbicide factors, and third is crop management factors, about which we will study in detail. Here to focus light on weed factors which are affecting herbicide resistance. First one is initial frequency of resistant weed species in a mixed population. Higher the initial frequency, greater and quicker is the chance of developing resistance in weeds. Second factor is hypersensitivity of weed species. Some weed species are hypersensitive to a particular herbicide which kills 90 to 95% of its susceptible population with a single application. In this case, selection pressure is higher and there is quicker chance of resistance development. Third factor is biological fitness. It is the relative evolutionary advantages of a phenotype based on its survival and reproductive success. If a resistant biotype is biologically more fit, there is quicker establishment of resistance. Fourth is weed biology. which refers to the seed dormancy, germination, mode of pollination, seed production capacity, and soil seed bank. The development of resistance gets delayed if continuous recruitment of susceptible individuals takes place from the soil seed bank by pre-sowing tillage. This is further influenced by dormancy, germination characteristics of wheat seeds and their production ability. Fifth factor is mode of inheritance of gene. Inheritance of a single gene which confer resistance against herbicide for a specific target site may dominate under field condition, inherit and express readily under heterozygous conditions resulting from outcrossing of weeds at field level. Here to study herbicide factors and crop management factors which are affecting herbicide resistance. Under herbicide factors, there are different categories. Like first one is application of highly potent herbicide. It increases selection pressure of resistance biotypes and increase resistance. Second one is application of herbicide having a single target site, a specific mode of action. Frequently application of such herbicides over locations imparts high selection pressure towards evolution of resistance with biotypes. Fourth one is overdependence and frequent application of herbicides without rotation. And fourth factor, application of herbicide having longer residual activity on soil. And fifth one is time and dose of application, which is impacting the resistance among weeds. As crop management factors are concerned, there are tillage and monoculture factors. Zero tillage or minimum tillage imparts resistance. And under monoculture, selective influence of particular weed to grow and consequently use of same herbicides to control without rotation impact the herbicide resistance. Here to study more details about herbicide resistance. Herbicide resistance is the inherent ability. If a resistant plant is allowed to reproduce, the resistance spreads, resulting in more and more plants that are resistant to that particular herbicide. Once herbicide resistance occurs, it will persist indefinitely. Herbicides acts by interfering the specific processes in plants known as the herbicide's mode of action. Different herbicides may have the same mode of action, and herbicides with the same mode of actions are grouped in various groups. The risk of herbicide resistance developing is higher in certain groups. The best way to manage herbicide resistance is to adopt integrated weed management by combining herbicide use with non-chemical control options, as well as ensuring any resistant plant do not set seed. Regularly monitoring the results of herbicide treatments and looking out for resistant plants is very important. And we have to undertake herbicide resistance testing on suspect plants that survive herbicide treatment and not relying on the same herbicide group for regular weed control, and rotating treatments using herbicides from different groups is recommended. Here to focus light on management of herbicide resistance. First we will study the circumstances where the resistance has already cropped off. Here the farmers' awareness, training and participatory approaches are quite important. Abandonment of the herbicide to which weed sowing resistance is equally important. A stopping of any sort of transactions of crop seed from an area having resistance to a new area to be held. Herbicide mixtures, sequences and rotations should be applied to avoid and delay development of cross or multiple resistances. Herbicide rotations are also advised once in every 3 years. Rogging and prevention of seed production and contamination chances of crops at harvest to be monitored. Use of competitive and high yielding variety to be used for a smoothing effect, and use of pure and certified seed is quite recommendable. Another factor is stale seed bed technique, like control of Felris minor. The fusses allowed to sprout, and it is followed by killing of by non-selective herbicide sprays like glyphosate. And there should be crop rotation and substitutions, which facilitates herbicide rotation, which is very effective. And there should be proper residue management, which controls the dispersal, and evolutions of alternative herbicides having different mode of action and using them in appropriate dosage and time is very important. There should be use of herbicide resistance crops, and clean tillage and equipments to stop the dispersal of resistance of weeds is advised to be followed of. Growing herbicide resistant crops is another form of managing herbicide resistance. There are three parameters which are used. Like first one is alteration of a crop to provide resistance to a herbicide that normally would kill off the crops. Here the traditional means of obtaining selectivity was to screen thousands of chemicals hoping to find a herbicide that could be used on a crop without causing injury. Herbicide resistance crops involve screening genes for selectivity rather than screening chemicals. As it has become more difficult to identify selective herbicides, easy ones already discovered, and it is less expensive to screen genes. Second, the methods of developing herbicide resistance crops. First one is traditional breeding techniques, and second is transgenic crops, means genetic engineering. We will discuss in broad about methods of development in next slide. And third one is glufosinate resistant crops, where the genes for an enzyme that degrades glufosinate identified in bacteria and inserted in crops, where the crop includes corn, cotton, soybean and canola. For developing herbicide resistance crops, there are different methods of development. First one is traditional breeding techniques. For the developing canola, there was triazine resistant canola which was crossed with a VD mustard, which is known as field mustard, that had developed resistance to triazine following repeated use of atrazine, which are insensitive target site. ALS resistant corn was also developed, created by mutagenesis of pollen by UV light. A mutation was found that resulted in an insensitive target site for ALS herbicides. And second method is transgenic crops, which is genetic engineering, where the genes will provide resistance to a herbicide identified in some other organisms and transferred to crop plant. The example is glyphosate resistant crops or Roundup Ready. The crops which were developed having a gene for insensitive target site found in bacterium, and their current Roundup Ready crops are corn, soybean, cotton, sugar beet, canola, etc. And numerous other crops also developed like wheat, creeping bent grass, Kentucky bluegrass, etc. And there are also genes that codes for an enzyme that degrades glyphosate, which has been identified and will be used in optimum gait crops. These crops will also contain a gene for resistance to ALS herbicides. Here we will study in details about prevention and management strategies for herbicide resistance. There should be different strategies for avoiding and managing problems with herbicide resistant weed biotypes. Keep in mind that relying on any one strategy isn't likely to be effective. We must use different strategies, carefully selected combinations to avoid or properly manage herbicide resistant weed problems. Like first one is only use herbicides when necessary. Where available, base herbicide applications on economic thresholds. Continued development of effective economic threshold models should be helpful. Second one is rotate herbicides, means the site of action. Don't make more than 2 consecutive applications of herbicides with the same site of action to the same field unless the management system include other effective control practices. Two consecutive applications could be single annual applications for 2 years, or two split applications should be in 1 year. After that, third one is apply herbicides that include multiple site of action. Apply herbicides in tank mixed, pre-packaged or sequential mixtures that include multiple site of actions. For this strategy to be effective, both herbicides must have substantial activity against potentially resistant weeds. Fourth action plan is rotate crops, particularly those with different life cycles. It will be helpful to manage the herbicide resistance. Fifth one is avoid more than two consecutive herbicide applications with herbicide resistant crops. Planting new herbicide resistant crop varieties should not result in more than two consecutive applications of herbicides with the same site of actions against the same weed unless other effective control practices are also included in the management system. Include mechanical weed control practices. Wherever feasible, combine mechanical weed control practices such as rotary hoeing and cultivation with herbicide treatments. And also we have to consider primary tillage. Where soil erosion potential is minimal, consider primary tillage as a component of the weed management program. Regularly scouting fields to identify the weed present. Quickly respond to changes in weed population to restrict the spread of weeds that may have been selected for resistance. And there should be clean tillage and harvest equipments. It should be cleaned thoroughly before moving from fields infested with resistant weeds to those that are not infested. After that, there should be also encouragement others to adopt prevention management strategies, where they encourage railroads, public utilities, highway departments, and similar organizations that use local vegetation control programs to use vegetation management system that don't lead to the selection of herbicide resistant weeds. Resistant weeds from local vegetation control areas frequently spread to cropland. Chemical companies, states and federal agencies and farm organizations can all help in this effort. Integrated weed management is one of the important components for managing herbicide resistance. Integrated weed management is the best approach to monitor and regulate any weed where mechanical, chemical and biological methods are used in a suitable fashion and combination. Integrated weed management is the coordinated use of a variety of control methods, reducing reliance on herbicides alone and increasing the chances of successful control or eradication. Integrated weed management programs require long-term planning, knowledge of a weed biology and ecology, and appropriate weed control methods. Integrated weed management involves using a combination of mechanical, cultural, chemical and biological weed control methods together in a planned way. The goal is to minimize weed competition with crops and reduce weed populations below an economic threshold level while avoiding environmental and health impacts. Here to study the principles and advantages of integrated weed management. First, we will go through principles of integrated weed management. There should be competitive advantage over the weeds by manipulating the crop habitat by utilizing some biological differences between crops and weeds. In integrated weed management, measures should be directed to reduce the survival mechanism of weeds in the soil. Crop cultural practices should be incorporated to discourage the establishment of the perennial and parasitic weeds. And for this, the crop rotation should be followed. Any individual element of the weed management should be eco-friendly and it should not be harmful to the environment. Weed management practices should be flexible to accommodate possible innovations and experiences of progressive farmers. Now, as the advantages are concerned, it shifts the crop weed competition in favor of crop, prevents weed shift towards perennial nature. There will be no danger of herbicide residue in the soil or plant, and it will prevent resistance in weed to herbicides, and there will be no environmental pollution and gives higher net returns and suitable for higher cropping intensity. Here to study the components of integrated weed management. First one is biological control. Biological control of weeds uses a plant's natural enemies such as insects, mites and diseases to reduce and control its population. It is an economical, effective and environmental friendly and sound method, but it is a long-term technique with extensive development and establishment phases. Biocontrol doesn't eradicate a weed but can reduce it in a acceptable level or suppress it to a level where it can be controlled with other methods. Second is flaming. Flaming is not a common or well developed method. It is used for weed control on organic farms, and it is for selective post-emergent control in heat-tolerant crops and general weed control on hard surfaces in urban areas. Next one is steaming. Steaming is a relatively new weed control method still in the developmental stage. It is the process of applying hot water to a weed results in the loss of the plant waxy coating and reduction in moisture, dehydration and death. The combination of heat and water pressure breaks down the cellular structure, causing discoloration and death within hours or over a few days. Next one is goats grazing. Controlling weeds with goats is a medium to long term proposition and can be highly effective in certain situations. Goats control weeds by selectively grazing with integration of sheep, cattle and cropping enterprises to provide weed control and pasture improvement. Another method is combination of herbicides. Herbicides are widely used to control weeds in agriculture, commercial and domestic situations. Herbicides are chemicals that kill plants by affecting their enzyme system, interfering with their growth processes, replacing with their hormones or blocking their chemical reactions. After that, cultivation. Destroying weeds through cultivation is a proven method of control. It is particularly effective on young weeds. Implements are used to dig up and destroy weeds. Next method is slashing. Slashing can be done mechanically with a tractor and slasher or by using a handheld brush cutter. It is cheaper than cultivation and preserves ground cover, reducing soil erosion and allowing access in wet weather. Next one is mulching. Mulching involves the use of physical barriers such as black plastic or woven weed matting to exclude sunlight and prevent weed establishment. Mulching is used for weed control in row crop production such as strawberries, where machinery lays back plastic between rows. Next one is fire. The success of fire as a weed control method depends on the amount of fuel, the speed and intensity of the fire, and the time of year that burning takes place. Fire is a major control method for woody weeds in western regions and can be useful for controlling lantana and blackberry in certain situations. Fire is used as a part of an integrated weed management program. Next component is reforestation. Reforestation is a long-term method of weed control where a dense tree canopy is formed to restrict sunlight penetration to weeds on the forest floor. Reforestation can be in the form of revegetation with native species or through establishment of plantations forests. Reforestation is suitable over large areas where other forms of weed control are uneconomic and impractical. Next component is land management. Good land management is critical to reducing the incidence and impact of weeds. The initial increased cost associated with better land management are compensated with reduced weed control. Next is weed hygiene. Weed hygiene includes sowing only weed-free seed, cleaning machineries and vehicles, checking clothing and equipment for weed seeds or weed fragments, and removing sources of weed reinfestation around a control site. Next component is weed identification. When weeds are identified in the early stages of their infestation, eradication is more likely. Control is economical when carried out early rather than waiting until the weed infestation has spread and become established. Now this is the end of this presentation. See you again shortly. Thanks.